始まったね。オッケーオッケー。始まったね。その共有もして。それって、ツイッターのこれいいか。はい。で、OBS の画面を見たいと思います。OBS の画面を見ていたいから。これをこの上するとするか。これいいか。これこっちの方。ここにな。これでいいな。これいいな。それで、ブラウザをして、これいいか。これいいね。これで、はい、OK やります。古文ね、はい。古文は単語と、今がそうだ、単語と文章になってくる。文章変えようかな。文章やってみよう。基本分かってた。文章、なんか変なしちゃった。どれをしたいの？やべえ、どうしよう。なんか音消えちゃったよ。焚き火の音消えちゃったよ。どうしよう。ちょっと待ってね。変なね、キーボードの変なね、ファンクションキーが押しちゃってね。音消えちゃったんだよ。ミュートになってないから、普通にこれか、これ。音も大きい。でかいよ、いいね。リアル。焚き火リアル。これでね、これで、古文、古文さ、こんだけ、竹取がね、竹取を見て、ずれずれでさ、英語読みたいな。英訳するか。英語読みたいから。声の問題だ。でも古文もそういうふうに読めないのか。古文ね。随筆の、随筆の本質。つれづれなるままに。ひくらし。つづりに向かいて心に移りゆくよしなしごとをそこはかとなく書き作れば怪しゅうこそ物狂おしけれ。つれづれなるままにletting it be, letting my hand freely writing. むずいな。everyday facing against すずり what's すずり in English? Facing against すずりむずいな。心に移りいいや、で、長いね。すごい情報量だね。この赤字とか見る。イデア。この世に生まれては、願わしかるべきことこそ、大カメレ。帝の王にはいとも賢し。竹の園王の末場まで、人間の種ならぬぞやんごとだき。一の人の王恩ありさまはさらなり。ただびとも ソネリーなど賜る際は勇士と見る。言ってきたけど勇士。声がちょっとやめよくねえな。ちょっと待って。まあいや、その子馬子までは、ほうれに種の名を名のめかし、それより下つかったはほどにつけつつ、時に愛したり顔なるも自らは意味して思うらねど糸口よし王子ばかり羨ましからぬものはあらず、人には木の橋のように思われるよと聖書難をかけるも現にさることぞおかしい勢いもに罵りたるにつけてイメージとは見えず総が聖の意見ように名門苦しく仏の恩を教えにたがうらんとぞ覚えるひたふるの捨て人なかなかあらまほしき方もありなん声が出にくいねこれはねちょっとよくない声が出にくいと何がよくないかってねこれね発声っていう身体運動にねフォーカスしちゃうんでこのね文内容に意識いかないんだなそんなにねあんまいかないっていうかちょっとしかわかんない何が人がちょっと黙読するわこれあれだな、酒飲んだ方がいいな、俺。酒飲んだ方が多分意味にフォーカスできる。酒だはい、酒。おじゃ酒。トリス。ちょっとちびった方がいい。ちょっとちび飲んだ。ステップ。トリスクラシック since 1946。ちょっとダメだ、これ喉が悪いな、今。まあ、こんなもんでいいでしょ。ちょっとね、今の状態は、物理次元にちょっとね、出にくい感じっていうか、なんていうかな。ちょっと意味が入ってきにくいんで、ちょっと工夫する。リスニングするわ、リスニング。古文のリスニングないのかなまあ、英語でいくか。ちょっと焚き火消して、焚き火つけたままでもいいけど、やめて、英語聞くわ、英語。こっち理解大事だね、勉強。長時間続けるのね。まあ、英語どうしようかな。物語だな。どっちかっていうと。あれ聞くか。ロード・オブ・ザ・リング。ロード・オブ・ザ・リング。オーディオブックってやればいいの。オーディオブック。あとね。まあ、音だけでいいよね。オーディオ、なんか静かになった。焚き火消えたから。いいね、静かな方がいいね。焚き火良かったんじゃなかった。The Lord of the Rings, the Fellowship of the Rings. 人に任せるってことだね。なんか音楽流れた。いいのか、俺。ちょっと待って、はい、次。
In the garden, Sam disappeared. The sun went down. Bag End seemed sad and gloomy and disheveled. Frodo wandered round the familiar rooms and saw the light of the sunset fade on the walls and shadows creep out of the corners. It grew slowly dark indoors. He went out and walked down to the gate at the bottom of the path, and then on a short way, down the hill road. He half expected to see Gandalf come striding up through the dusk. The sky was clear and the stars were growing bright. It's going to be a fine night, he said aloud. That's good for a beginning. I feel like walking. I can't bear any more hanging about. I'm going to start, and Gandalf must follow me. He turned to go back, and then stopped, for he heard voices, just round the corner by the end of Bagshot Row. One voice was certainly the old gaffer's. The other was strange, and somehow unpleasant. He couldn't make out what it said, but he heard the gaffer's answers, which were rather shrill. The old man seemed put out. No, Mr. Baggins has gone away. I went this morning, and my Sam went with him. Anyway, all his stuff went. Yes, sold out and gone, I tell you. Why? Why, it's none of my business or yours. Where to? That ain't no secret. He's moved to Bucklebury or some such place. Away down yonder. Yes, it is a tidy way. I've never been so far myself. They're queer folks in Buckland. No, I can't give no message. Good night to you. Footsteps went away down the hill. Frodo wondered vaguely why the fact that they did not come on up the hill seemed a great relief. I'm sick of questions and curiosity about my doings, I suppose, he thought. What an inquisitive lot they all are. He'd half a mind to go and ask the gaffer who the inquirer was, but he thought better or worse of it, and turned and walked quickly back to Bag End. Pippin was sitting on his pack in the porch. Sam was not there. Frodo stepped inside the dark door. Sam, he called. Sam. Time. Coming, sir, came the answer from far within, followed soon by Sam himself, wiping his mouth. He'd been saying farewell to the beer barrel in the cellar. All aboard, Sam? Said Frodo. Yes, sir. I'll last for a bit now, sir. Frodo shut and locked the round door and gave the key to Sam. Run down with this to your home, Sam, he said. Then cut along the row and meet us as quick as you can at the gate in the lane beyond the meadows. We are not going through the village tonight. Too many ears pricking and eyes prying. Sam ran off at full speed. Well, now we're off at last, said Frodo. They shouldered their packs and took up their sticks and walked round the corner to the west side of Bag End. Goodbye, said Frodo, looking at the dark, blank windows. He waved his hand and then turned and, following Bilbo, if he had known it, hurried after Peregrine down the garden path. They jumped over the low place in the hedge at the bottom and took to the fields, passing into the darkness like a rustle in the grasses. At the bottom of the hill on its western side, they came to the gate opening onto a narrow lane. There they halted and adjusted the straps of their packs. Presently Sam appeared, trotting quickly and breathing hard. His heavy pack was hoisted high on his shoulders, and he had put on his head a tall, shapeless felt bag, which he called a hat. In the gloom he looked very much like a dwarf. I'm sure you've given me all the heaviest stuff, said Frodo. I pity snails, and all that carry their homes on their backs. I could take a little more yet, sir. My packet is quite light, said Sam, starkly and untruthfully. No, you don't, Sam, said Pippin. It's good for him. He's got nothing except what he ordered us to pack. He's been slack lately, and he'll feel the weight less when he's walked off some of his own. Be kind to a poor old hobbit, laughed Frodo. I shall be as thin as a willow wand, I'm sure, before I get to Buckland. But I was talking nonsense. I suspect you've taken more than your fair share, Sam, and I shall look into it at our next packing. He picked up his stick again. Well, we all like walking in the dark, he said, so let's put some miles behind us before bed. For a short way they followed the lane westwards. Then, leaving it, they turned left and took quietly to the fields again. They went in single file along hedgerows and the borders of coppices, and the night fell dark about them. In their dark cloaks they were as invisible as if they had all had magic rings. Since they were all hobbits, and were trying to be silent, they made no noise that even hobbits would hear. Even the wild things in the fields and woods hardly noticed their passing. After some time they crossed the water west of Hobbiton by a narrow plank bridge. The stream was there no more than a winding black ribbon, bordered with leaning alder trees. A mile or two further south they hastily crossed the great road from the Brandywine Bridge. They were now in the Tookland, and bending southeastwards they made for the green hill country. As they began to climb its first slopes, They looked back and saw the lamps in Hobbiton far off, twinkling in the gentle valley of the water. Soon it disappeared in the folds of the darkened land, and was followed by Bywater beside its grey pool. When the light of the last farm was far behind, peeping among the trees, Frodo turned and waved a hand in farewell. "I wonder if I shall ever look down into that valley again," he said quietly. When they'd walked for about 3 hours, they rested. The night was clear, cool and starry, but smoke-like wisps of mist were creeping up the hillsides from the streams and deep meadows. Thin-clad birches, swaying in a light wind above their heads, made a black net against the pale sky. They ate a very frugal supper, for hobbits, and then went on again. Soon they struck a narrow road that went rolling up and down, fading grey into the darkness ahead, the road to Woodhall and Stock, and the Bucklebury ferry. It climbed away from the main road in the water valley, and wound over the skirts of the green hills towards Woody End, a wild corner of the East Farthing. After a while they plunged into a deeply cloven track between tall trees that rustled their dry leaves in the night. It was very dark. At first they talked, or hummed a tune softly together, being now far away from inquisitive ears. Then they marched on in silence, and Pippin began to lag behind. At last, as they began to climb a steep slope, he stopped and yawned. "I am so sleepy," he said, "that soon I shall fall down on the road. Are you going to sleep on your legs? It's nearly midnight." "I thought you liked walking in the dark," said Frodo. "But there's no great hurry. Merry expects us sometime the day after tomorrow, but that leaves us nearly 2 days more. We'll halt at the first likely spot." "The wind's in the west," said Sam. "If we get to the other side of this hill, we shall find a spot that's sheltered and snug enough, sir. There's a dry fir wood just ahead, if I remember rightly." Sam knew the land well within 20 miles of Hobbiton, but that was the limit of his geography. Just over the top of the hill, they came on the patch of firwood. Leaving the road, they went into the deep, resin-scented darkness of the trees and gathered dead sticks and cones to make a fire. Soon they had a merry crackle of flame at the foot of a large fir tree, and they sat round it for a while, until they began to nod. Then, each at an angle at the great tree's roots, they curled up in their cloaks and blankets, and were soon fast asleep. They set no watch. Even Frodo feared no danger yet, for they were still in the heart of the Shire. A few creatures came and looked at them when the fire had died away. A fox passing through the wood on business of his own stopped several minutes and sniffed. "Hobbits," he thought. "Well, what next? I've heard of strange doings in this land, but I've seldom heard of a hobbit sleeping out of doors under a tree. 3 of them. There's something mighty queer behind this." He was quite right, but he never found out any more about it. The morning came, pale and clammy. Frodo woke up first, and found that a tree root had made a hole in his back, and that his neck was stiff. "Walking for pleasure? Why didn't I drive?" he thought, as he usually did at the beginning of an expedition. "And all my beautiful feather beds are sold to the Sackville Bagginses. These tree roots would do them good." He stretched. "Wake up, hobbits," he cried. "It's a beautiful morning." "What's beautiful about it?" said Pippin, peering over the edge of his blanket with one eye. "Sam, get breakfast ready for 9:30. Have you got the bathwater hot?" Sam jumped up, looking rather bleary. "No, sir, I haven't, sir," he said. Frodo stripped the blankets from Pippin and rolled him over, and then walked off to the edge of the wood. Away eastward the sun was rising red out of the mist that lay thick on the world. Touched with gold and red, the autumn trees seemed to be sailing rootless in a shadowy sea. A little below him to the left, the road ran down steeply into a hollow and disappeared. When he returned, Sam and Pippin had got a good fire going. "Water!" shouted Pippin. "Where's the water?" "I don't keep water in my pockets," said Frodo. "We thought you had gone to find some," said Pippin, busy setting out the food and cups. "You'd better go now." You can come too, said Frodo, and bring all the water bottles. There was a stream at the foot of the hill. They filled their bottles and the small camping kettle at a little fall where the water fell a few feet over an outcrop of grey stone. It was icy cold, and they spluttered and puffed as they bathed their faces and hands. When their breakfast was over, and their packs all trussed up again, it was after 10 o'clock, and the day was beginning to turn fine and hot. They went down the slope and across the stream where it dived under the road, and up the next slope, and up and down another shoulder of the hills, and by that time their cloaks, blankets, water, food, and other gear already seemed a heavy burden. The day's march promised to be warm and tiring work. After some miles, however, the road ceased to roll up and down. It climbed to the top of a steep bank in a weary, zigzagging sort of way, and then prepared to go down for the last time. In front of them they saw the lower lands dotted with small clumps of trees that melted away in the distance to a brown woodland haze. They were looking across the woody end toward the Brandywine River. The road wound away before them like a piece of string. "The road goes on forever," said Pippin, "but I can't without a rest. It's high time for lunch." He sat down on the bank at the side of the road and looked away east into the haze, beyond which lay the river, and the end of the shire in which he had spent all his life. Sam stood by him. His round eyes were wide open, for he was looking across lands he had never seen to a new horizon. "Do elves live in those woods?" he asked. "Not that I've ever heard," said Pippin. Frodo was silent. He too was gazing eastward along the road, as if he'd never seen it before. Suddenly he spoke, aloud, but as if to himself, saying slowly, "The road goes ever on and on, down from the door where it began. Now far ahead the road is gone, and I must follow, if I can, pursuing it with weary feet, until it joins some larger way where many paths and errands meet, and whither then I cannot say." "That sounds like a bit of old Bilbo's rhyming," said Pippin. "Or is it one of your imitations? It doesn't sound altogether encouraging." "I don't know," said Frodo. "It came to me then, as if I was making it up. But I may have heard it long ago. Certainly it reminds me very much of Bilbo in the last years, before he went away. He used often to say that there was only one road, that it was like a great river. Its springs were at every doorstep, and every path was its tributary. 'It's a dangerous business, Frodo, going out of your door,' he used to say. 'You step into the road, and if you don't keep your feet, there's no knowing where you might be swept off to. Do you realize that this is the very last path that goes through Mirkwood, and that if you let it, it might take you to the Lonely Mountain, or even further, and to worse places?' He used to say that on the path outside the front door at Bag End, especially after he'd been out for a long walk." "Well, the road won't sweep me anywhere for an hour at least," said Pippin, unslinging his pack. The others followed his example, putting their packs against the bank and their legs out into the road. After a rest they had a good lunch, and then more rest. The sun was beginning to get low, and the light of afternoon was on the land as they went down the hill. So far they'd not met a soul on the road. This way was not much used, being hardly fit for carts, and there was little traffic to the woody end. They'd been jogging along again for an hour or more when Sam stopped a moment as if listening. They were now on level ground, and the road, after much winding, lay straight ahead through grassland sprinkled with tall trees, outliers of the approaching woods. "I can hear a pony or a horse coming along the road behind," said Sam. They looked back, but the turn of the road prevented them from seeing far. "I wonder if that is Gandalf coming after us," said Frodo. But even as he said it, he had a feeling that it was not so, and a sudden desire to hide from the view of the rider came over him. "It may not matter much," he said apologetically, "but I would rather not be seen on the road by anyone. I'm sick of my doings being noticed and discussed. And if it is Gandalf," he added as an afterthought, "we can give him a little surprise, to pay him out for being so late. Let's get out of sight." The other two ran quickly to the left and down into a little hollow not far from the road. There they lay flat. Frodo hesitated for a second. Curiosity or some other feeling was struggling with his desire to hide. The sound of hooves drew nearer. Just in time he threw himself down in a patch of long grass behind a tree that overshadowed the road. Then he lifted his head and peered cautiously above one of the great roots. Round the corner came a black horse. No hobbit pony, but a full-sized horse, and on it sat a large man who seemed to crouch in the saddle, wrapped in a great black cloak and hood, so that only his boots in the high stirrups showed below. His face was shadowed and invisible. When it reached the tree and was level with Frodo, the horse stopped. The riding figure sat quite still with its head bowed, as if listening. From inside the hood came a noise as of someone sniffing to catch an elusive scent. The head turned from side to side of the road. A sudden, unreasoning fear of discovery laid hold of Frodo, and he thought of his ring. He hardly dared to breathe, and yet the desire to get it out of his pocket became so strong that he began slowly to move his hand. He felt that he had only to slip it on, and then he would be safe. The advice of Gandalf seemed absurd. Bilbo had used the ring, and I am still in the Shire, he thought, as his hands touched the chain on which it hung. At that moment the rider sat up and shook the reins. The horse stepped forward, walking slowly at first, and then breaking into a quick trot. Frodo crawled to the edge of the road and watched the rider, until he dwindled into the distance. He could not be quite sure, but it seemed to him that suddenly, before it passed out of sight, the horse turned aside and went to the trees on the right. Well, I call that very queer and indeed disturbing, said Frodo to himself, as he walked towards his companions. Pippin and Sam had remained flat in the grass and had seen nothing, so Frodo described the rider and his strange behaviour. I can't say why, but I felt certain he was looking or smelling for me, and also I felt certain that I didn't want him to discover me. I'd never seen or felt anything like it in the Shire before. But what has one of the big people got to do with us? Said Pippin. And what is he doing in this part of the world? There are some men about, said Frodo. Down in the South Farthing they have had trouble with big people, I believe. But I have never heard of anything like this rider. I wonder where he comes from. Begging your pardon, put in Sam suddenly. I know where he comes from. It's from Hobbiton that this here Black Rider comes, unless there's more than one, and I know where he's going to. What do you mean? Said Frodo sharply, looking at him in astonishment. Why didn't you speak up before? I've only just remembered, sir. It was like this. When I got back to our hole yesterday evening with the key, my dad, he says to me, "Hello, Sam," he says. "I thought you were away with Mr. Frodo this morning. There's been a strange customer asking for Mr. Baggins of Bag End, and he's only just gone. I've sent him on to Bucklebury. Not that I liked the sound of him. He seemed mighty put out. When I told him Mr. Baggins had left his own home for good, he stiffed me, he did. It gave me quite a shudder. What sort of fellow was he?" says I to the gaffer. "I don't know," says he, "but he wasn't a hobbit. He was tall and black-like, and he stooped over me. I reckon it was one of the big folk from foreign parts. He spoke funny."
What is it all about?
"I couldn't stay here more, sir, since you were waiting, and I didn't give much heed to it myself. The gaffer is getting old, and more than a bit blind, and it must have been near dark when this fellow came up the hill and found him taking me here at the end of our road. I hope he hasn't done no harm, sir, nor me." "The gaffer can't be blamed anyway," said Frodo. "As a matter of fact, I heard him talking to a stranger. He seemed to be inquiring for me, and I nearly went and asked him who it was. I wish I had, or you'd told me about it before. I might have been more careful on the road." "Still, there may be no connection between this rider and the gaffer's stranger," said Pippin. "We left Hobbiton secretly enough, and I don't see how he could have followed us." "What about the smelling, sir?" said Sam. "And the gaffer said he was a black chap." "I wish I had waited for Gandalf," Frodo muttered. "But perhaps it would have only made matters worse." "Then you know or guess something about this rider?" said Pippin, who had caught the muttered words. I don't know, and I'd rather not guess, said Frodo. All right, Cousin Frodo, you can keep your secret for the present if you want to be mysterious. In the meanwhile, what are we to do? I should like a bite and a sup, but somehow I think we'd better move on from here. Your talk of sniffing riders with invisible noses has unsettled me. Yes, I think we'll move on now, said Frodo, but not on the road, in case that rider comes back or another follows him. We ought to do a good step more today. Buckland is still miles away. The shadows of the trees were long and thin on the grass as they started off again. They now kept a stone's throw to the left of the road and kept out of sight of it as much as they could. But this hindered them, for the grass was thick and tussocky, and the ground uneven, and the trees began to draw together into thickets. The sun had gone down red behind the hills at their backs, and evening was coming on before they came back to the road at the end of the long level over which it had run straight for some miles. At that point it bent left and went down into the lowlands of the Yale, making for Stock. But a lane branched right, winding through a wood of ancient oak trees on its way to Woodhall. That is the way for us, said Frodo. Not far from the road meeting, they came on the huge hulk of a tree. It was still alive and had leaves on the small branches that it had put out round the broken stumps of its long fallen limbs. But it was hollow and could be entered by a great crack on the side away from the road. The hobbits crept inside and sat there upon a floor of old leaves and decayed wood. They rested and had a light meal, talking quietly and listening from time to time. Twilight was about them as they crept back to the lane. The west wind was sighing in the branches. Leaves were whispering. Soon the road began to fall gently but steadily into the dusk. The star came out above the trees in the darkening east before them. They went abreast and in step to keep up their spirits. After a time, as the stars grew thicker and brighter, the feeling of disquiet left them, and they no longer listened for the sound of hoofs. They began to hum softly, as hobbits have a way of doing as they walk along, especially when they are drawing near to home at night. With most hobbits, it is a supper song or a bed song, but these hobbits hummed a walking song, though not, of course, without any mention of supper and bed. Bilbo Baggins had made the words to a tune that was as old as the hills, and taught it to Frodo as they walked in the lanes of the water valley and talked about adventure. Up on the hearth the fire is red, beneath the roof there is a bed, but not yet weary are our feet. Still round the corner we may meet a sudden tree or a standing stone.
今は昔酒取りの家なんていうのもありけど、今までだけど別に嘘の使いけり。なおばさんの息子なみいける。その竹の中にもっと光る竹なみ一筋ありける。怪しがりてよりてみるに普通のが光りたい。それを見れば三寸ばかりになるし、いつ美しゅうていたい。大きな言うよ。我朝ごということに見る。竹の中に忘れて知りぬ。子に何たもるきとなめりとって、手に打ち入れて家持ち的。目の女に預けたしなばす。美しいこと限りなし。糸を押さなければ、子に入れて養う。そのうち記憶力も上げないとな。今一回読んだぐらいで全部なんか暗唱できるぐらいの記憶力が欲しいです。欲しいね、その記憶力。それぐらい、まあ、なるでしょう。ちょっと練習する。もう一回。もう一個。結構勉強したな、古文。まあ、初回だからな、古文。別にいいか。古文思い出しましたぐらいでいいか。いいよね、別に。なんかな。世界史の復習するか、世界史。世界史の復習しよう。復習の教科書。教科書。教科書。あ、ない。教科書なんか見つからない。やったのはインダス文明がなんか 原っぱも返上だろうがなんちゃらなんちゃらみたいな。なかなか覚えれないわ。一度も覚えたことないです。どこ？あ、俺だ。まあ、こんな。あ、そうなんだ。真あ、そうなんだね。あ、そうなんだね。はい。ドラビデンス。ドラビディエンス。原っぱも炎上だろうね。もう一個乗ってないじゃん。まあ、太字だけ乗ってるだけだよ。太字だけ乗った。あとは、トラックし。とりあえず言葉を覚えないとね、話にならんでね。レグウェーダー。レグウェーダー。ガンジスがインダスガンジ。インダスガンジス。バイシュ。サンスクリット。サンスクリット。アーリアは後期なの？あ、そうなんだ。シュードラ、バールナ。バールナスね。シューセイ。カスト。ああ、じゃあチャンドラグプタね。あ、バルダマーだね。バルダマーナ。ガウタマ、シダールタ、ブーダ、ブリズム。あ、思い出した、あれでしょ。あれでしょ。発祥。なんでしょ。あ、もうここまで。あ、いいのか。パーテ地図ね。確かさ、ここにあれが原っぱも返上だろうなんてある。だってね、原っぱ。あれ、原っぱ書いてないじゃん。パーテリプト。サータバー花町。聞いたことあるぞ。あ、それ最初に言ってたですね。サータ聞いたことあるなみたいな。サータバー花。ガンダーラ。まあ、いいかも。こんなやってないもんね。ガンダーラ。ナガルジュナか、リュウジュは。さっきの、なんだっけ。バルダマーナ。ナガルジュナ。全然違うか。違ったね。リュウジュはナガルジュナ。チャットラグブタ。カリダース。バーラ。まあ別に、単語覚えてけねえ、単語に知り合いになっときゃいいんで、単語だけ覚えてけんで、意味わからなくても、そういう言葉があるんだっていうレベルで。もういいや、はい。復習でした。てか、結局なんだっけ？アーリア人が先住民大国勢力蹴散らして、なんだっけ、カイバル峠だっけ？峠越えてきて、侵入してきて、収めて、稲作始めたんだね。栄えましたみたいな。そうだね。16マガーダチャンドラグプタがマウリア朝か。あれ朝廷の話か。王朝か。王朝も朝の会だったね。それでいいんじゃない？そんな感じの流れ。そこまで違くない？復習完了。さあ終わるか。勉強と一旦休憩かな。じゃあね。